Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may think it's typical for rabbis to speak about anti-Semitism, but I rarely do. I prefer to speak of Jewish life rather than of those who threaten it. I'd rather give my attention to people who make Jewish life meaningful rather than give attention to the few who waste their breath trying to shame it. I'd rather speak words of Torah than give any time to those who speak words of hatred. And although I have always been grateful for the watchdog organizations which study and count and analyze anti-Semitic incidents, I am quietly critical of leaders who beat the drums of fear and bravado, as if the shadows were existential threats, because they are not. I am quick to remind myself, my children, my congregation, that we live in the most blessed time and place in all of Jewish history. Let me say that again so that we can consider the weight of these words. We live, in my opinion, in the most blessed time and place in all 4,000 years of Jewish history. The sky is not falling. We have a strong Israel, thank God. And thank God we live in a very good country with every opportunity available to us for life and health, for progress and privilege, for learning and for making meaningful contributions to shape and influence the greater society. And yet, in recent weeks, it feels that something has shifted, and we do need to speak of it. While anti-Semitic acts have been on a steady decline, there has been a spike since the most recent U.S. election, and we cannot pretend the hatred is checked at the border. We know it isn't. You remember not long ago the modern Orthodox synagogue in Ottawa, Machzikei Hadass, was vandalized, and there was an immediate response from the Prime Minister himself on Twitter denouncing it. And the very next Shabbat afternoon, the Ottawa multi-faith community and those without any faith gathered at the synagogue to show solidarity and to make it clear that there was no place for anti-Semitism in Ottawa. This week you may have heard that a building at Yonge and Shepherd was attacked with multiple incidents where the mezuzot on the doorposts of Jewish homes were destroyed and notes were delivered with hateful messages for the residents there. And Mayor John Tory condemned the hate-motivated vandalism and said that those actions do not reflect the city's spirit. He said anti-Semitism has no place in Toronto. Our Jewish residents should not have to face hatred on their doorsteps, he said. He also said that both Council and the city are responsible for promoting and protecting Toronto's cultural diversity. He issued a similar statement earlier in the week after anti-Muslim protesters called for a ban on Islam outside a downtown mosque. The mayor said, "The richness of our diversity has contributed immensely to the city's greatness, and while we have work to do on inclusion, we are admired the world over." And so we should express gratitude to our leading officials, government officials who act swiftly when news comes. There was also, an attack against the Jewish Community Center in London, Ontario, and similarly there was an immediate response. These stories also, by contrast to south of the border, these stories make the mainstream press immediately. It took 68 incidents at JCCs in the United States before it became a mainstream story. That is far too long. And it took far too long for the American president to denounce anti-Semitism as well. Purim is on its way. Thank goodness. And then comes Pesach. What do these two holidays have in common? There is that old adage, they hated us, we survived, let's eat. And there is something to that. But the theological differences between these two holidays of Purim and Pesach are significant. The Pesach story is filled with countless examples of divine intervention, while the scroll of Esther is a godless book. Not once is God's name mentioned. The deliverance, the miraculous rescue at the sea was all God's doing. But in Persia, the deliverance, the miraculous rescue, is described as the creation of human initiative, human planning. At least on the surface, Persian Jewry was saved by way of human will. Most post-Holocaust Jews believe the rules of the game of human history have changed since the parting of the Red Sea, that God no longer intervenes. God may weep with us in our suffering, but God does not intervene into matters of human history. Another distinction between the Purim story and the Pesach story: the book of Exodus begins with the words, "And then there arose a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph." We are not told how we got from Joseph's Egypt and a Pharaoh who admired him to Moses' Egypt. We are not told how things unraveled for the Israelites so quickly. There is nothing subtle about the later Pharaoh's hatred. It was a matter of fact, a matter of public policy, a fundamental truth built into the sophisticated Egyptian civilization. How did things go so wrong so fast? We don't know. The text is silent. But not so in the Megillah. The beginning of the Purim story is more like the diaspora world we know. The Jews of Persia were living the good life. There was affluence. There were Jews in high places. Acculturation and assimilation, for that matter, were widespread. And so we never saw it coming. The hatred expressed by Haman was not new or even surprising. But the shocker came when the self-indulgent king Ahasuerus allowed for his evil advisor to harness a subtle undercurrent of bigotry that was out there, to give it shape and form, and to package it as public policy. It is written in the Megillah, "And the king then said to Haman, 'The people is yours, do with them as it pleases you.' And he handed over his signet ring, allowing Haman to issue his edict against the Jews. The letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to exterminate, the text says. All the Jews, both young and old, the text says, little children and women, the text says, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder and take their possessions as well, the text says. And then it is written, this is a key phrase, and we might miss it if we don't read carefully. V'ha'ir Shushan navocha. The city of Shushan was perplexed. The general population of this sophisticated city was confused by Haman's edict. How could this be? There were at least two responses among the Jews, very different at first. The first represented by Mordechai, the second by Esther. First, Mordechai, we might call him an alarmist Jew. He rent his clothing and he put on sackcloth and ashes and he went out into the center of the city square and he cried out with loud and bitter weeping. And we read that many Jews joined him there, mourning and fasting, weeping and wailing in this public protest. The other response, on the other end of the spectrum, on the other end of the city, was Esther and her simple denial. It is written, when her maidens and eunuchs told her how Mordecai was behaving, she was greatly distressed and had proper garments sent to clothe him, but he would not accept them. You see, she didn't go into the city square herself to console her people or even her own cousin Mordecai. She kept herself apart from her people and protected in the palace. She hid herself in the comforts there, and she sent a messenger to literally cover up Mordecai's grief, to quiet his concern. But Queen Esther's denial could not last long. Mordecai sent a message back to her saying, "Do not think in your heart that you of all the Jews will escape because you are in the king's house. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place." This expression, "from another place," is taken by our sages to be the Megillah's hidden reference to God. God is that other place of redemption. This is how the rabbis write God into the scroll. Mordecai continues, "But you and your father's house will be destroyed, and who knows, Esther, whether you have not come into this royal position for exactly this time, for exactly this purpose." And then something clicks in her. Esther then realizes that her destiny is in every way bound up to the destiny of her people. How do we know? Her reply message to Mordecai this time is clear. She strategizes, she instructs, she is galvanized herself and galvanizes her people. She says, "Go and gather together all the Jews of Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast. And then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Esther the queen sees now that she depends upon her people as much as her people depends upon her. A part of the Megillah which is often forgotten, not often taught, comes after the hanging of the villain Haman. Esther stood a second time before the king and pleaded, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, let it be written to recall the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil which will come upon my people? And how can I endure to see the destruction of my kin?" King Ahasuerus then said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "You may further write with regard to the Jews however you like. In the king's name, you can seal an additional edict with the king's signet ring. However, an edict which is written in the king's name and is sealed with the king's ring may not be recalled." It seems that they could not undo Haman's original decree. So what could they do? How do they wind it back? Letters were then sent by night couriers on horseback, and in these letters, the king granted permission for the Jews of every city throughout the lands, quote, "to assemble and to fight for their very lives, so that the Jews should be ready on that day to defend themselves against their enemies." The masquerade of Purim only lasts for one day. Every other day of the year, nothing is hidden from our sight. The fanciful spiel is over. The curtain closes. The masks and the costumes come off. every other day of the year. We get real. And there are 3 messages from the Megillah which we must carry out. Take note of these 3. 1, what Esther learned, that we are all in this together. The destiny of each one of us is wrapped up in the destiny of every other Jew, here, in Paris, in South Carolina, in Jerusalem. Second, this comes from that second edict which was written. The first edict could not be recalled. We can't undo the damage that has been done. We must acknowledge that a hateful call against our people is already out there, not sent by horseback riders, but much more swiftly through the effective web of the internet and social media. It reaches far and wide. It reaches far to the right and far into the left too, and it cannot be recalled. But we can issue a second edict, granting one another permission for defense, not with weapons of steel, God forbid, as was described in the Megillah, God forbid. But we can and we must arm ourselves with knowledge and with courage, an unwavering commitment to see the truth and to speak it. Publicly, privately, we must know who we are. We must teach it to our children and to our grandchildren. We must devote real time and effort to living full, enriching Jewish lives of Shabbat and Torah learning, so that we know who we are, we know where we've been, we know what we've survived, and we know to whom we belong. These are the very weapons that Mordechai raised against Haman when Mordechai refused to bow down. This is the armor that Esther donned when she prepared to approach the king without invitation. Let us be graced with a measure of the same dignity, of confidence and conviction. And third, the third message we must hear from Megillat Esther is that we are not alone. We have not been given any king's signet ring to use as we see fit. But in this good country we have been given a voice and an ear, not only of those in power, but also of ordinary people, friends and neighbors, co-workers, fellow citizens, with a discerning ear for uncovering the truth about what is and what must come to be. Take courage, we are not alone. To this call for action on the human plane, on this Shabbat, in this sacred place, let us add our eternal prayer that God, who is mysterious and sometimes hidden from us, as in the Purim story, that God will add divine strength to human strength, divine will to reinforce the human will, as in the Pesach story. And as we read from our Siddur just moments ago, Tzur Chayenu Magen Yish'enu Atahu Ledor Vador, you are God. You are the rock of our life, the power that shields us in every age. Amen.